Thank you, Mamie. I am very well represented here tonight. Senator Ford is my senator, and I'm proud to be a constituent of his, and one of the recipients of the award tonight, Kathy Willard, is also my city council member. So I feel very good to be here, and I feel very honored to be able to make this presentation. As many of you recall, last year at this time when we had the annual awards dinner, we were all flush with the excitement of the recent wonderful result in the City of Atlanta versus Oxendine case, forcing the insurance commissioner to allow the City of Atlanta, as well as others, to offer domestic partner benefits to its employees. We were able to be honored that night to have Judge Wendy Shube with us, just as we are tonight, who took the courageous stand in her decision to let it be known in no uncertain terms that the commissioner could no longer prohibit such benefits. And Judge Shube, I want to thank you again and for coming and for taking the stand that you've taken in that case. Tonight it is my honor and privilege to be able to present an award to two other significant players in this drama, Kathy Willard and her life partner, Karen Janae. As all of you know, the City of Atlanta had been authorized to offer domestic partner benefits for a number of years, but yet was still frustrated in its efforts when its insurer's application for providing these benefits were consistently denied by the insurance commissioner. After the city had filed suit to force the commissioner to drop this prohibition against the approval, the case had been prosecuted in the name of the City of Atlanta. And after the suit was already filed, then City Council member Kathy Willard intervened in the action as a named plaintiff as she was seeking benefits for her partner, Karen Janae. Now, to a lot of people, this was sometimes viewed as an abstract issue, but the intervention of Kathy Willard in this suit gave this a real face and a reality so that people could see that this was a real issue affecting real people day to day, and that it was affecting adversely gay and lesbian employees, not only of the City of Atlanta, but for any employer. This was not only important to the litigation, but this was a significant step and took a great deal of courage for Kathy and Karen to step forward and do it. As Dr. King said, as long as there's injustice anywhere, there can never really be justice. And for someone to be willing to put themselves in the public eye, in the face of the publicity, particularly in such a high-profile position as Kathy occupied, was not an easy decision to make. But suddenly this was no longer an abstract issue because, as Kathy showed, there were real consequences for this wrong-headed and misguided action by the commissioner, particularly in the position that she was in. And I know because I campaigned for her when she ran for city council. There were people who were all too willing to continue the negative stereotypes of members of this community, and all too willing to deny the same fair and equal treatment to all the citizens of Georgia, and all too willing to offer criticisms for someone in Kathy's position to be taking the stand that she was taking. But both Kathy and Karen did not shrink from this challenge, but they met this challenge head on, said yes, they would gladly join this fight in a public way, and did it with the energy and commitment that they have shown towards each other in their 13-year relationship. Indeed, they were able to demonstrate that this was a very real problem that needed to be addressed and affects individuals on a day-to-day basis. And in doing this, they transformed what some might view as more of an academic question into a real problem that people could see affected not only members of our community, but members of the entire community of the state of Georgia. Now, unfortunately, Karen is not able to be with us tonight due to a long scheduled out-of-town trip. But I wanted to say a few words about Karen, because Karen, as many of you know, has been hard at work for years for issues important to the community. When she came to Atlanta over 20 years ago, she was working for Hemophilia of Georgia, and she was one of the early pioneers in many aspects of the battle against AIDS, both in epidemiology and in AIDS-related social work on many fronts. When she was in Washington, D.C., she worked for the National Pediatric AIDS Foundation. And then when she and Kathy returned to Atlanta, she went back to work for Hemophilia of Georgia. And as many of you have heard Karen say many times, describing herself as the wind beneath Kathy's wings. And as far as Kathy is concerned, since 1998, when she became the council member representing my district in District 6, she has been a tireless worker to demonstrate the need and the results when intelligent and effective management can be brought to bear on public policy issues and quality of life issues. She chairs the Transportation Committee, which is currently overseeing the expansion of the airport, and also serves on the Public Safety and Finance Executive Committees of the City Council. Her long and varied record of community service and community involvement in public service includes her work as a Peace Corps volunteer in Micronesia, as well as her service as the National Field Director for constituent advocacy programs for the Human Rights Campaign. She's also served on the board of directors of the Georgia ACLU. She's currently an active member of HRC, the Georgia Equality Project, and the Atlanta Executive Network. Governor Barnes has appointed her to serve on the board of directors of the Georgia Research Alliance, and she's also on the technology task force for the Georgia Municipal Association. We're proud to say, too, that she is the second vice president of the Gay and Lesbian Municipal Elected Officials Committee and represents Georgia on the National League of Cities Community and Economic Development Committee. I could go on and on about the accomplishments of both Karen and Kathy in all of the various aspects of their community service. But I want to say that I appreciate the courage that they exhibited by standing up and doing what they did in this lawsuit. I'm proud that Kathy Willard has been my council member, and now as the districts are being redrawn and she will no longer be able to represent me in that capacity, I want to encourage everyone to help me in giving every citizen of Atlanta the opportunity to have her represent them as the president of the Atlanta City Council. Tonight, the Stonewall Bar Association recognizes the significant contribution that Karen and Kathy have made on behalf of all of us in their fight to ensure that all citizens of this state will be granted the fair and equal treatment that is basic to each and every one of us. So Kathy, if you would come forward, please.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. You're hired. Karen really wanted to be here tonight. She is actually on a trip with her best friends from high school. About every couple of years they go out of town, and we've been together long enough that I have gone on some of these trips, and I was able to retire a few years ago when I said I cannot hear another high school story again. So I was available to come, but unfortunately she was not, because they planned these with great diligence and exaggeration for months ahead of time. So they are in South Beach, and there could be trouble. I've notified the openly gay elected officials down there to just watch out, but the girls are there. But she did want to be here, and this is a very special moment for both of us, because it's not often that as a couple we get to do things together, particularly in my world, in the political world. And this was something that was very much important to both of us. It probably should have been a difficult decision had we had any thought about, the exposure that we give to ourselves, but we so hated this policy, and it meant so much to us to do this, that when the legal team started discussing this with us, we really leapt at the opportunity, as oftentimes when you get rewarded for good things that you do, you don't necessarily give it all the consideration that perhaps you should. I want to say that for me, the pleasure in this, not only in being able to beat the commissioner at his own game, was that all I had to do, besides being gay, was to engage in a very pure and uncomplicated love affair with Karen Janae for 13 years. And to be rewarded for that is quite a pleasure. Thank you. I am truly sorry that she's not here tonight, because when you think of that, when you go before the public to say, you know, recognize what we have here, what really is the backbone of my life, and we joke all the time about her being the wind beneath my wings. It really is true, and we support each other in that way, and to have the recognition now officially at the City of Atlanta for our relationship, and within the state for this relationship, and certainly within the insurance companies for our business, we're really happy. And I want to say a little bit about the case, because again, I feel like we got to ride along on something that was very important. The next award will be to the team who represented us in this, and I have to say, as this was going on, there are few times in one's life, especially when you're in a lawsuit, which is generally not a real happy time, but in this case it was, when you look out at the representation you have and you know that you have the finest, most passionate, most capable team that you could ever have. You could never find a team that would do a better job for you in this representation. Wouldn't be distracted by virtually anything, because the passion that they brought to this case was equal, if not exceeding, the passion that Karen and I could bring to the case. That is a fine moment indeed. You just don't get that opportunity very often in your life to look out and think, I have got the finest people around me that I could have. And we couldn't lose. And I don't know what is appropriate for one to say about a judge, but it is a great reassurance to know that you have a judge who is going to use her professional competence in the way that it needed to be used, because so often, as we see with gay people in legal cases and other minority people, that sometimes logic and training don't prevail in the arguments, but that we did have a judge that could listen and could understand what was going on and make a decision that was based on a rational legal case and not some of the other irrationalities that sometimes prevail in these circumstances. So all in all, it was a very fine moment, and I was delighted to be a part of it, and Karen and I celebrated quite heartily in being a part of this. It's also a real privilege to represent the citizens, the employees in the city of Atlanta, because Robin and I are fortunate that we are somewhat high profile as gay employees, Phil McDonald as well, but there are lots of gay employees at the city of Atlanta who sort of don't share our status, if you will, as being known as being openly gay and in the city. And this is really for them. You know, ultimately, I may get fired by the people that I represent, but I can't get fired by the city for the actions that I would take. And so we have to think about all of those employees at the City of Atlanta, many of whom that I've come into contact in other kinds of cases, who are really strongly affected by this and who will experience a better work and personal environment as a result of this decision. So thank you for that. I just want to tell a little story of my own, since everybody's been telling really good stories. Sort of relates to this, and I think it's sort of the icing about sharing your relationship with people. I get a lot of pleasures at the Atlanta City Council. Sometimes I get a lot of pains, but mostly it's a lot of pleasures. And I recently got to swear in the city council at Maryland Elementary School. There's a number of 3rd through 5th graders who were becoming representatives, and I had the president and vice president and secretary and treasurer on the stage with me, and then a whole row of the 3rd through 5th graders who are the student body representatives. And I gave my speech and challenged them to go out and grow democracy at Maryland Elementary School. And it was really a fine moment, because I love kids, and I was honored to be there. But as I was being introduced in this ceremony, the to third graders who are the officers who are secretary and treasurer of those are seats that are awarded to third graders at Maryland. They split the honors of reading my introduction, and that their teachers had helped them prepare from my official biography. And so the little boy who was the treasurer read the first half of who I am and what I do, and this little girl named Lauren read the second half of who I am and what I do. And she closed with what is at the close of my official biography at the city, that I live in Candler Park and with my partner, Karen Janae. And as I was sitting there watching Lauren read this, I thought, well, what a remarkable moment this is, that the teachers who prepared this event were thoughtful enough not to disinclude my partner in something that they very well could have and very well might have at another date and time. And what a remarkable event that this little girl and all the little kids in the school heard this, and nobody seemed to think it was anything that was particularly unusual, as best I could tell. Although Lauren was very concerned about how you pronounce Karen's last name because it's a little tricky, but she did quite well. And so I swore Lauren in and everybody else. And later I was out in the hallway and Lauren's mother came up to me. She was there and said, you know, we're really glad that you're here because this was very important for Lauren. She was excited that a real city council member came to swear her in, and she's excited about being the treasurer or secretary, whichever it is she is. And I thought, well, you know, that's great. I was really excited about that. And then Lauren's mother's partner, who apparently was on our team, arrived as well to shake my hand. And I thought, what a great moment. You know, what a wonderful thing, you know, for Lauren to be able to be on city council, student council, and for me to be her city council member, and for me to come to her school and swear her in, and for us to share that moment, which she was far more aware of than I was at the particular moment. And I just think it really goes to show how far we really have come, and how important our relationships are, and acknowledging our relationships so that they are not something that's some, you know, extraterrestrial hobby that we have, as opposed to, you know, pure and uncomplicated relationships that are loving and wonderful. So it is our pleasure, mine and Karen's, to be able to receive this award, and even more our pleasure to be represented by the fine team that you'll get to meet, and to just have the opportunity to beat Commissioner Oxendine into the ground on this issue. So thank you very much.
Versus John W. Oxendine case. More hisses. We have so many award recipients on this award, and I'd just like to acknowledge them very briefly. Robin J. Shahar, Kendrick Smith, Yen Su Jo, these are the City of Atlanta attorneys, and I should recognize that there were 3 organizations who played an integral role in the advocacy of this case: City of Atlanta, the ACLU, and Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund. And from Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, we have Stephen Scarborough. And this time in their roles as ACLU attorneys, we have Harry Harkins, Jr., and Patrick McCrary. And to introduce the award is our treasurer, John Israel.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm John Israel, the treasurer of the Stonewall Bar Association, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the recipient of this year's award for meritorious service to the Stonewall community. As Kathy said just a minute ago, this is a team effort, and we decided to give it to one member of the team who could stand up here and speak for everybody else. So tonight, we're presenting this award in representation of the team's effort to Mr. Kendrick Smith, on behalf of his work and the work of all the attorneys who advocated on behalf of the City of Atlanta in its fight against our good friend John Oxendine. As we all know, John Oxendine attempted and for a while rather successfully managed to bar the City of Atlanta and private corporations from providing secure domestic partnership benefits in Georgia. The eventual triumph in the City of Atlanta v. Oxendine made the provision of secured partnership benefits possible in Georgia. Our recipient tonight is a person who's been working his entire legal career to better the community for all persons in Georgia. Mr. Smith graduated from the law school at the University of Mississippi in 1969. He then moved to Georgia and began his career working for Atlanta Legal Aid, where he worked until 1978. In 1978, he started working for Georgia Legal Services, where he worked until 1982, at which time he joined the City of Atlanta's Attorney's Office. In his free time, Kendrick sings baritone with the Atlanta Symphony Chorus. We had the rare opportunity tonight to give an award to a person who's not only a great lawyer, but is also a two-time Grammy recipient. Kendrick shared a Grammy with the other members of the Atlanta Symphony Chorus twice in the past. He's been singing with the group for the last 30 years. He shared with me the other day that he's a member of St. Luke's Episcopal Church and is presently learning the ropes, pardoning the pun, of English-style bell ringing in the church's new bell tower. He tells me this hobby is to be his musical retirement plan. So please join me in recognizing our recipient of the Meritorious Service to the Stonewall Community Award on behalf of all the attorneys who advocated for the City of Atlanta, Mr. Kendrick Smith.
Sorry. Thank you, John, Mimi, distinguished members of the bench and bar. When I first became a lawyer at the Legal Aid Society in 1969, the office at that time was very much involved in a case called Sanks versus Georgia. That case, just to digress at the beginning, that case involved the eviction law that was on the books of the state of Georgia at the time. It was a law that required that in order to contest an eviction, the tenant had to post a cash bond and twice the amount of the expected rent to become due over the next 6 months of duration of the eviction proceeding, which meant that in fact you had to pay a year's rent in advance into the court. The decision, the case that was pending in the Supreme Court of the United States was an appeal from the Supreme Court of Georgia, reversing a decision striking down that statute by Judge Osgood Williams, who at that time was a judge on the State Court of Fulton County. I remember being struck at that time by the judge's basis for decision. Oh, he discussed the rights of due process and things of this nature, and cited a number of cases that talked about fundamental due process rights. But the basis for his decision was founded in Scripture. And the ruling of his case was focused on a saying of the prophet Micah, which was, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God?" Judge Williams truly believed that, and he truly believed that this was a fundamental principle so ingrained in the character of our community in a number of ways that this law on its face was obviously unjust and unconstitutional. Fortunately, the legislature read the same opinion, did not like the fact that the case was pending in the Supreme Court, and amended the law so that that was no longer a problem. If you worked for the ACLU or for the Atlanta Legal Aid Society or Georgia Legal Services or for Lambda or for any other organization that does primarily public service work, you have the satisfaction of knowing that you're representing the rights of individuals and of groups of individuals every day against oppression and against discrimination, against principles that diminish the nature of all our humanity. If you work for a government agency sometime, you get the feeling that people don't believe you might be working for the same thing. If you are defending a civil rights action, if you're defending that First Amendment case, it doesn't look quite the same way. You do not get quite the satisfaction. You may be doing the proper job in representing your client, but it's not quite the same as it was when you were fighting for the rights of the individual, when you were fighting for basic justice, loving justice, as the prophet Micah said, and as Judge Williams knew was the law of laws. In this particular case, I know I was fortunate because I hadn't been able to be involved in a case of this nature for a long time. I had been representing the city. I'd been attending council committee meetings. I had been representing the city in personal injury cases. I'd been proclaiming the virtues of sovereign immunity and other things that many members of the bench and bar find reprehensible. The opportunity came through Robin Shahar to get involved in this case. And basically I was invited to be involved in it because of her participation in it. The thing that amazed me the most was that Robin, after a few months of getting me involved in the case, asked me to lunch one day and said, I have something to tell you. And I said, well, what is that? And she said, well, I'm pregnant. And I said, well, that's very nice. And what does that have to do with our case? And she said, well, it has a lot to do with our case. You see, about the time this case is going to reach the Supreme Court of Georgia, and now I'm talking about the first appeal. There were 2 appeals in the Supreme Court of Georgia. About the time this case reaches that stage, I will be 9 months pregnant. And at that time, she was also involved in her famous war with our former Attorney General and decided that it might be best if someone else stood up and made the argument in court. And that was why I was afforded the privilege of being able to argue the case twice in the Supreme Court of Georgia, losing the first time, winning the second time after we'd modified our ordinance. And then it was at that point that City of Atlanta versus Oxendine began. Because at that point, when we thought we had won the war, we discovered that we had a public official who was not going to follow the plain meaning of the ruling of the Supreme Court of Georgia, and managed to frustrate and delay us for at least another year at that point. Fortunately, we were able to bring those cases to a head through the cooperation of our insurers and get the case into Superior Court, where a courageous Superior Court judge basically told Mr. Oxendine that he had to follow that law. And I think he got the message. It was very clear. I would like to say, first of all, that as far as the city's involvement in the case is concerned, Robin did 80% of the work, maybe 90% of the work. She coordinated the work that was going on with Lambda, with Steve Scarborough, with ACLU, and there were many sessions, the planning sessions and skull sessions over sushi at Roussan's, which was Steve Scarborough's favorite place to go. And it really opened up a whole new thing for me in my job. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the fact that even though Sujo and I did not do 80% of the work, we were allowed to participate in the case and enjoy it and actually get to stand up and talk in court about something that involved a matter of fundamental fairness. Fundamental fairness having to do with people who are in committed relationships being able to have the same kind of benefits, the same kind of recognition of relationships that people who have legal papers from the state have. And in this particular instance, that case was primarily about the benefits that come from the domestic partnership case. This would not have been possible had it not been that the city actually had done something very right, which was that the mayor and the city council had passed an ordinance that provided for domestic partnership recognition and for domestic partnership benefits, and had seen to it that we would carry the fight through. And this was something that made us very proud to be representing the city in this instance. To have Steve representing Councilmember Woolard in this instance. It was a very thrilling and exciting position for us to be in. We don't very often get to do that, working in the city attorney's office. So I'd like to thank Robin for involving me in this, and for involving me and Sujo in this, and letting us have the opportunity to work on this. We thank you very much for this award. We want you to know that we appreciate the recognition, and it's something that we'll never forget. Thank you very much.
Court, and he helped convince the court that it was unconstitutional to discriminate on the basis of race when choosing jury members in the famous Batson versus Kentucky case. He also helped convince the Supreme Court of New York with one of his amicus briefs that when a woman says, "I do," she does not give up the right to say, "I don't," and in so doing helped abolish the marital rape exception. He made a couple of attempts in these early years to persuade courts that gay people have the right to equality. He wrote amicus briefs, which helped convince the 10th Circuit that a statute that regulated the speech of gay teachers was unconstitutional, and he attempted valiant.
Thank you. Well, I really have to thank you, Beth, for that very moving introduction. It really touched me, and I'm really proud to hear that from you, and I'll call your attention to the materials that I put on the table out front. Lambda is advertising several jobs. As Lambda grows, much as our community, we look forward to the help, so please come right in. Obviously, there are many role models for all of us here tonight, so thank you for that. It's really great to be back in Atlanta, and I thank the Stonewall Bar Association for inviting me here. It's particularly good for me to see so many Lambda alumni, so many Lambda staff members and colleagues of mine, so many board members, and of course my colleague in arms, Steve Scarborough. It is always a pleasure to come here and to be part of the family. I'm also really proud to be here with such terrific honorees. You really have chosen extraordinary people. It is just a testament to the vitality of this community and to our movement that you have the people that we honored tonight. And I'm especially glad to be here with a former Lambda client, Robin Shahar. So congratulations to all the honorees and the honored guests. The great work that you are honoring tonight is, I think, and indeed the great crowd you have tonight in this important association, I think tells us something about the city of Atlanta, about the state, about the country, about the community we are building in this country, and about our movement. I read recently, about a month ago, an article that came out in a very prestigious international journal coming out of Sydney, Australia, your successor in Olympic hosting. And the journal reported that it did a survey of the factors, the indicia, the indicators that correlate with a city's likelihood of success. And it surveyed a variety of factors, and of all the factors it came up with, it said the number one predictor of a city's vitality and likelihood of succeeding in the new global economy is the presence of a vital lesbian and gay community. And it's no coincidence, the journal said, that this is true. It's not just because lesbians and gay men are terrific, as you testify to tonight. It's not just that we are, as people have said, talented, articulate, passionate, charismatic, fun. It's not just that lesbians and gay men bring something very special to the communities in which we live, but it's because a city that has that kind of vital community, that makes that community, the community we are building, welcome, is a city that says something about itself. It's a city that has a non-gay population that recognizes and appreciates diversity and talent. It's a city that has put in place civil rights protections and opportunities and support for a diverse and respectful population that includes minorities, including minorities who are sometimes vulnerable. And you are building that kind of city in Atlanta, and it's no coincidence that Atlanta is doing so well and looking like it looks and going in the direction it looks, because the presence of our community, together with the community of people we have reached out to and who have reached out to us, the non-gay people who were represented by the honorees we've seen tonight, that says something about where we are going. Now, I cite that study because it obviously struck me as very exciting and interesting to see it confirmed in print, what all of us know when we walk through our favorite neighborhoods. But beyond that, because it conforms to the vision of activism that we at Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, believe we are fulfilling, that I think many people in this room fulfill, and that I think all of us have an obligation to go out of this room reminding ourselves, reminding our friends, reminding our allies, and reminding the reachable the kind of activism that we need to tell people we need to hold ourselves to. And it is an activism that has three elements. And they are, first of all, that we reclaim, recapture, seize, and shape the terms of the public discussion. We take the vocabulary. We set the terms in which people learn about the reality and diversity of our lives. The second element is that we engage. We don't stay in our ghettos. We don't stay in our communities. We don't stay where we are most comfortable, but we reach out to the many, many fair-minded and reachable and persuadable, but not yet there, non-gay people, as well as the people who are there but deserve to be asked to join in, that we engage. And the third element, and these all have to happen together, and they're never going to be over, they have to keep going on and on. The third element is that we take legal and political action building on those terms of the debate and the engagement that we do. Now, that's the vision of activism that we at Lambda believe in. And I think that's the vision of activism that the people you have honored represent. And it's the vision of activism that we have to take up with renewed and redoubled commitment here in Atlanta, here in Georgia, and throughout our country, just as we're seeing it throughout the world. Now let me flesh out a little bit those three elements. The first one is shaping the terms of the debate. The example I would have given about 10 days ago is, I think, one that's probably obvious to everyone. Indeed, there are actually two that are obvious to everyone. Lambda's fight, our fight, to win the freedom to marry has changed people's vocabulary in how they talk about the lives of lesbians and gay men. And if you needed proof of that, speaking of terms of debate, you need look no further, as Lori pointed out, to the debates we have seen amongst the candidates for the highest offices in our country. And I want to focus for a moment, not so much on last night's presidential debate, but on what I think was an even more telling exchange in the vice presidential debate a week before. The question was asked, you may remember, and I agree with Lori, look at how far we have come that the question is even asked, that people have to grapple and talk about our equality as a major, national, real, and significant criterion for deciding how to vote. The question was asked of Joe Lieberman and Dick Cheney, something along the lines of, do you believe that a man who loves a man and a woman who loves a woman should be entitled to the full and equal constitutional rights that are afforded to other citizens? And remember the answers. Both candidates immediately took that important question and answered it with what vocabulary? Talking about marriage. They talked about our equality because both of them recognized that you cannot talk about equality for lesbians and gay men today without talking about the central social and legal institution of our society, an institution from which we wrongly and unjustly, but remediably, remain excluded. Both candidates took the question in its generic form and put it in the vocabulary in which they live. Non-gay people live in the world of marriage. It is a world that we as lesbians and gay men have been wrongly excluded from. We know, and they know, that there are other family protections and other family forms that are deserving of respect. We know, and they know, that not every marriage succeeds. We know, and they know, that although we hear of love and marriage in popular songs and in our culture and in people's understanding, there are other ways and other expressions for love. And yet, the vocabulary in which non-gay people talk of love, talk of family, and thus talk of equality is marriage. And both Joe Lieberman and Dick Cheney went there. Joe Lieberman and Dick Cheney had something important to say to America. What they said was, both of them are grappling with and are open to gay people's freedom to marry. They're not fully there yet, although they had many other things to say about the importance of equality and finding ways to protect our families and making sure we're included. But both of them said we are open to and wrestling with and engaged in this national dialogue on marriage itself. Now, if Joe Lieberman and Dick Cheney can have a discussion on national television about gay people's freedom to marry, why can't we? If the Republican vice presidential candidate, an extremely conservative Republican, and a centrist Democrat can discuss gay people's freedom to marry and talk about their openness to it and affirm the importance of dialogue and how they've been moved by their friends coming to them and telling them stories, if they can do that on national television, one presidential election away from the year 1996 in which both parties were falling over themselves to vote to exclude us from marriage, to pass the neighbors, and to do so patiently and persistently and forthrightly and confidently and respectfully and seriously and here. That's setting the terms of the debate. It's asking for what we're entitled to, our birthright as Americans, as human beings, to full and complete equality and inclusion. Now, the second element I gave you was engaging non-gay allies, not just talking to ourselves, not being afraid of people saying no and therefore not asking. And there I want to turn to another example, and it's one that Beth gave an indication of. And that is the extraordinary, gratifying public response to the Boy Scouts' anti-gay discriminatory policy that harms gay and non-gay youth all across this country. That response started even before the U.S. Supreme Court ruled. When Lambda stood before the United States Supreme Court, joined by many organizations, including organizations, some of which I'm sure many here belong to, we did not stand there alone as lesbians and gay men. We had the privilege and the honor of standing before the United States Supreme Court on behalf of a mighty coalition of non-gay and gay voices, voices that were willing to take on this all-American, iconic, difficult to challenge organization, the Boy Scouts, in front of a not likely to be particularly forthcoming and respectful and helpful court in the year 2000. We were joined before that court on the question of whether lesbian and gay kids exist, on the question of whether this American institution should be excluding and discriminating against those kids, and on the question of whether gay men, and thus all of us, are qualified and entitled to work with kids. This was not, at first blush, an easy case. And yet, as we stood there before the court, we stood there with every leading civil rights organization in this country, the NAACP, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, the National Organization for Women and the National Organization for Women Legal Defense Fund, every women's rights group in the country, every leading First Amendment group in the country, from the ACLU, People for the American Way, and others, the American Bar Association, which rarely files brief, the American Psychological Association, leading youth organizations, the American Association of School Administrators, 11 states, 7 cities, including your own, and my personal favorite, the 4-H Club. We were not alone. We are not alone. As the honorees you have recognized tonight demonstrate, non-gay people are reachable and have come to understand more and more that our fight is not just for gay rights, important as that would be in and of itself. What we stand together on is a vision of a community and a country that truly believes that all people in our beloved country have the right to be both equal and different, and that no one should have to give up her or his difference in order to be treated equally. The work we do here is for real people and is for everyone's civil rights and is for the inclusion and respect and enlargement of possibilities that gay and non-gay people can believe in together if we would reach out to one another. And what's happened since the 5-4 decision of the Rehnquist majority in the Supreme Court has, I think, been one of the most moving and amazing things that I've ever seen. What has happened all across the country is not just gay people protesting the Boy Scouts' discriminatory policy. Every day, we have seen letters to the editors, editorials, and action taken by school boards, cities, United Ways, funders, donors, parents, Eagle Scouts sending back their badges, Scout troops taking a stand of essentially rebellion against discrimination, people who don't want to attack Boy Scouts, people who love the program, and because they believe it is valuable and important, refuse to be accomplices to discrimination that harms kids. And those voices, those non-gay voices, are speaking up all across the country, day after day now, in the 3 months since the decision, to dissociate themselves from discrimination and to channel their support away from the one youth program in the country that discriminates to the vast number of major youth programs that have rejected discrimination in favor of inclusion. Groups like the 4-H Club, as all-American as you can get, the YMCA, and let's remember what the C stands for, the Campfire Girls and Boys of America, the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, and the Girl Scouts of America. Every single one of those national youth programs and many others, Jewish community groups and so on, have rejected this discriminatory course that the Boy Scouts' current leadership have put the organization on, a course the members never voted for. We have the opportunity to reach out and empower the fair-minded, the reachable, the concerned citizens of our beloved communities and invite them to speak out and take a stand. They have the opportunity to take a stand on behalf of all kids. And what America has come to learn through this case and the work that many of us have done over the last decade is that all kids includes lesbian and gay kids. It includes bisexual kids. It includes transgendered kids. And it includes non-gay kids who deserve the opportunity to grow up not being taught a lesson that it is okay to look down on people who are different. It includes the non-gay kids who deserve the opportunity to be part of a rich and diverse community that looks forward, not backward. Now, that's not going to happen as swiftly as it should. It's not going to rescue as many kids from becoming indoctrinated in yet another generation of bigotry unless we seize the opportunities and believe that we can make a difference. Sometimes I'm not sure what proof people need. If Dick Cheney talking about openness to gay people's freedom to marry on national television is not enough, what more are people looking for? If an organic response all across the country of good-hearted and fair and caring parents and teachers and people and entities and funders to stand up and take on what is for them a difficult position of saying it is not right to support a program that excludes some kids and destigmatizes some kids and teaches a message of discrimination to all kids, if that response is not enough, what would be? And if the gathering of the talent and passion and courage that we have in this room tonight is not enough to challenge each one of us to do better, to go out and serve the larger community and to demand everything that all of us is entitled for and not shoot too low, then I don't know what is. But what I do know is that you've all sat here a very long time tonight to pay tribute to wonderful people doing wonderful work, and by that testimony to do tribute to the faith that I think each one of us has, that we can make a difference. What I have found in this work more than anything else is that what holds us back is not so much the bitterness and the fear and the intolerance and the hatred and the apathy that we see on the part of many. What I think holds us back more than anything else is that we are not seizing the moments as much as we can, that we aim a little too low, we take a few too many excuses, we fear a little too much, we start a little too small, we don't believe that any one of us can actually make the difference. But you know what? As several speakers have said tonight, we have changed the world. We have come so far. It is extraordinary when you step back a moment, undaunted by how far we have to go, and think of how far we have come. It was only 7 years ago, a nothing in historical time. It was only 7 years ago that virtually no American in the country had put the words lesbian and gay and marriage in the same sentence. It was in 1993, not as it sometimes seems 1776, it was in 1993 that the Hawaii Supreme Court first put this question that Bush and Cheney and Lieberman and Gore wrestled with on national television, this question of the denial that we have suffered from full equality and the freedom to marry before the country. And already in that 7-year period, we have seen leading national polls tell us that 2/3 of all Americans have now come to believe that gay people will win the freedom to marry. Americans have come to believe it, and it is a reality waiting to happen. It is a reality that we can make happen and give to the next generation of youth, gay and non-gay, so that they can live their lives starting much further down the road of enlarged possibilities that all of us seek and all of us deserve. Your being here tonight is a step along that road. You're going out into the community and working with community groups from the NAACP on to find alternatives and channels of support for youth programs that don't discriminate. You're being here to empower our gay and non-gay brothers and sisters to find their voices, to speak out for this vision, to reach out and give people the ability to speak out and take action. That's what's going to make it happen. Your being here tonight is the first step in that, and the next step in that, building on so much that so many have done. Let's go do it. Thank you.
Evan, your words are absolutely inspirational, and thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. And I think it's absolutely clear to me and everyone in this room that we are incredibly lucky to have you advocating on behalf. And everyone in the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community thanks you.
Thank you.
And to Miami, and then he's got another conference next week. He's a busy man, but we're very lucky to have him. And we wanted to give you a small token of our appreciation as well.
That's a big token.
It's well.
Thank you.
Well, I will make my closing remarks brief.